Okay, all right. Well, hello, hey everyone. It's Profesor Cañedo here, and as you can clearly see, I'm safely in the confines of my French Valley World Headquarters. Um, I wanted to make this video outside in the patio, but it's a little bit too warm out there, for lack of a better term. Yeah, the temperatures out here have been in the mid to high 90s, and nearby places like Hemet and Lake Elsinore have been over 100. I think they've been over 100 now for about the past 4 or 5 days, and it looks like that's going to continue at least until the next a few days. So until the heat finally breaks, I'll go ahead and record these videos for you safely in the confines of my world headquarters. All right. Well, listen. What I'm going to do for you today and for the next few weeks is give you a series of videos in which I preview the readings for the week. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't have a video for you about this last week, in which of course, we examined the pre-classic and the classic periods. Uh, so of course, that was the topics we looked at in terms of the Olmecs, in terms of Teotihuacan, the Maya. But because it was the first week of the session, and I had quite a few introductory and administrative and nuts and bolts types of things, and of course, trying to make sure that everybody has his or her books, and then adding the new people to the classes, whether it was for either section 501 or section 502. So definitely a lot of stuff going on. But I think for the remainder of the session, for these next 6 weeks, it'll be much more conducive for me to present these preview videos. So these videos will go along with those overview essays that you see at the beginning of each module. So without further ado, let me go ahead and get things started and talk a little bit about the readings for this week. And this we're looking at the post-classic period of Mesoamerica. And before I talk a little bit more about the about some of the about some of the readings and the PowerPoint programs, and of course the Aztec film, let me just quickly mention some of the key differences between the pre-classic, classic, and the post-classic period. What we're going to be seeing in the post-classic period is more of an emphasis in which political power isn't so much tied to supernatural power. Now, what I mean is this. When we saw what's happening in the pre-classic and the classic periods, we saw where political power was really tied to supernatural power. So in other words, depending on what the gods said, depending on what the supernatural beings were essentially saying, that was a base for political power. So if you remember from the Olmecs, you saw the first political leaders were the first religious leaders, the shamans, for lack of a better term, the medicine men, the witch doctors. Because if you recall, as uh, village life and settled life begins to take root in Mesoamerica, starting first with the Olmecs, agriculture gives people more time to engage in, say, leisure activities. So whether it's things such as folklore, early forms of music, oral traditions, storytelling. In other words, people have more time to think about their position in life, their place in the cosmos, and because of that, we see the rise of intermediaries who, in essence, navigate between the physical world and the supernatural world. And these intermediaries, of course, are the shamans, the medicine men, you might say the intermediaries, the go-betweens between what's happening here on Earth and what's happening up in the sky with the gods, the deities, and other supernatural beings. So over time, these early religious leaders become the first political leaders, and that was the pattern for both the pre-classic and into the classic periods. Post-classic is a bit of a different ballgame in that even though gods and deities are very important elements of the life systems of a culture, and of course for the Aztecs, that's definitely very significant, with the legends of the gods like Huitzilopochtli, Tlaloc, Quetzalcoatl, Tezcatlipoca, and a few others. But we're seeing other elements come to the forefront, and we're talking about things such as militarism, uh, that is battles for territorial gain, territorial expansion, conquest, political prisoners, long distance trade, luxury good economies, things of this nature. So, in other words, we're seeing more and more things which seemingly erode at the fabric of a political rule that is based upon religion on gods and deities and supernatural beings. In other words, the the leaders of the post-classic period, whether it's the Toltecs or the Aztecs, they begin to recognize that they can't just depend on what the gods say to base their society. They can't simply say, "Oh, Descatli, Quetzalcoatl tells me this, so because he tells me this, you people have to do this." Blah blah blah. Doesn't really work that way anymore. So the leaders recognize that they've got to examine other things as the base for political rule. And as a result, what we're seeing in places like Tula, where the Toltecs were based, the the rise of architecture designed to, shall we say, accommodate the masses. That is, large plazas, large complexes, larger ball courts in which to house the masses. Uh, in other words, having the support of the people, that becomes more significant in terms of the base for political rule. So in other words, that's why you see in places like Tula and then Tenochtitlan, we see these large gathering places for the masses, for the people to gather. Likewise, too, as as some of these cultures, like the Toltecs and Aztecs, engage in trade for luxury goods, whether it's or common goods, whether it's cacao beans, whether it's quetzal bird feathers, or whether it's for minerals like what the Teotihuacanos have, green obsidian. Uh, we're seeing goods, resources. In other words, early forms of currency, or early forms of much like gold and silver is very significant for the 20th and 21st century Western society. We're seeing these types of similar elements really come to the forefront and become significant basis for not just economic power, but for political power too. So we're seeing that come into the mix in more detail in the post-classic period. So those are just some of the key elements that I think, well, we need to keep in mind as we try to determine or view what makes the post-classic period, roughly from about 8900 to about 1519, 1520, when of course Cortes and his merry band of henchmen make their way into Mesoamerica. So roughly for about six and a half centuries, from about 8900 to about 1519, 1520, that then is the period that we consider to be the post-classic period. So with that preview in mind, let me quickly go over what's coming up in the readings. For this week, please finish off with the ancient Mexico stuff. Now, it seems like we just got the book and we got to finish it. But again, that's part of the function of the fact that we're only on a 7-week time frame. So whereas in 8-week classes, we would get ancient Mexico done in 3 weeks. We're kind of a hard pressed for time. Let's go ahead and finish off with ancient Mexico by the end of this week. So please read pages 221 to 293. The pages might be different if you got the 9th edition, but for the most part, it's roughly the same. So basically, the post-classic period, the section that Lathrop has, please finish that off this week, whether you have either the 9th or 10th editions of ancient Mexico. And of course, the focus is predominantly on the Toltecs and the Aztecs. Some of the other cultures too, like the post-classic period, post-classic Mixtec people, they were the ones who came after the Zapotecs in Oaxaca. That's where Monte Alban is located. There's some coverage of them there, but all intents and purposes, the Toltecs and the Aztecs, those are the main guys we're going to be looking at this week. After you finish off ancient Mexico, then look at the PowerPoint programs on both the Toltecs and Aztecs respectively. Go over to page 3 of this week's module, and of course, at the very top page of the module, I've got all the attachments there, so download all of that. And hopefully all of you have the software to view PowerPoint. So whether you have Microsoft Office, or you've got PowerPoint Viewer, which you can download free, or you have Apple Presentation, which also reads PowerPoint. As long as you have those programs in your computer or whatever device you're using now, I guess nowadays you can actually use your phones to look at all of this stuff. So make sure you have something to view the programs. But if you're not reading the programs, if you can't see the programs, please let me know right away. I'll send you the link uh, in which you can access the PowerPoint viewer in which to view the PowerPoint programs. Okay. All right. And then after you look at the PowerPoint programs on the Toltecs and Aztecs, Then look at the film about the Aztecs, Engineering an Empire, starring RoboCop star Peter Weller. Uh, and the link for that is also on page 3 of this week's module. Uh, Weller focuses in on a lot of the agricultural and architectural wonders of the Aztecs. Um, and uh, and it shows that just before the rise of the powerful emperor, so whether it's the emperors Ahuitzotl, Itzcuatl, Moctezuma the first, Ashayacatl, um, Weller examines what some of these emperors are all about, but we also see coverage of some of the early emperors too, the ones who you might say helped to pave the way in which the Aztecs could finally break free of the Tepanek kingdom and their powerful King Desosomoc. After King Desosomoc dies, that's when the you might say the ball game, the equation changes, and the Aztecs see their chance to break free of the Tepanek kingdom uh, in the early parts of the 15th century. So Weller and all the scholars who are in the film go through all of that. They do a great job in talking about how the Aztecs emerged from being a low-class band of goons, marauders, barbarians, chichimeca, whatever term you wish to use, how they go from that to being the dominant power player in the Valley of Mexico, starting in the early parts of the 15th century. All right, now after we finish off with the Aztec film, then we're going to start switching gears and taking a look at the continental United States because uh, keep in mind this class, we're looking beyond Mexico too, and the fact that because the designation is Mexican American history, we want to analyze what's happening in North America too. So, by way of comparison with the dominant Aztec society in the early 16th century, uh, Gary Nash, a famous scholar who used to be at I believe UCLA. I'm not sure if he's still there now, but but he's been at UCLA for many years. Uh, in this PDF reading, also you find the link, you find the download the PDF file from page 3 of the module. Uh, what Nash shows us is what's happening in other parts of North America on the eve of the European arrival. So some of the cultures that Nash wants us to look at. We look at the people of the Southwest. We're talking about the Pueblos, and of course the Pueblos are descendants of the famous Anasazi people. The Anasazi were the ones, of course, who were in New Mexico, and they had the famous uh, uh, multi-story apartment complexes. Whether it's a place like Chaco Canyon, Pueblo Bonito. Nash gets into a lot of the key traits that the Pueblos and their Anasazi ancestors had. And then by way of comparison over in the southeast, we have there's these powerful warlike militaristic bands of people like the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Creek, and the Creek and the Cherokee. These are the people that we find in places like northern Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. So Nash shows us what makes these cultures special. Basically, you might say the traits that the southeastern people had, even though they weren't as complex uh, in terms of powerful civilizations like the Aztecs, I would say that they had many of the important traits that the Aztecs had, but on a little bit more of a little bit more of a smaller scale. But uh, nonetheless, there's I think many commonalities between some of these southeastern groups like the Choctaw and Cherokee compare that with the Aztecs. Now, as you finish off with the readings that Nash has, it's pages 22-24 on the PDF file. Nash also gives us a comparison and contrast between the worldviews of both the Europeans and the Native Americans. Um, Simply put, Native Americans had this idea that you're in harmony with Mother Nature, you're in harmony with the earth, harmony with the land, this type of ideal. But of course, the Europeans, especially the English or Protestants, had a bit of a different view. Their view was largely based on what the Book of Genesis said. This idea that you're going to go forth and multiply, subdue the earth, conquer the earth, take in the resources. Uh, essentially this mindset gave rise to the idea that that the resources that were there in the New World were there for the taking for the Europeans, and of course the native populations were seemingly in the way. They were obstacles. The Spaniards. They didn't really have this mindset that much. They were more interested in, shall we say, incorporating the natives into their worldview. That is their view of uh, their view of civilization. That is this Catholic-based view. But for the European Protestants, especially the English, bit of a different story. And of course, we'll analyze more about these types of themes as we go forward into the rest of the session. Once we see more about the Europeans, especially the English. All right. So with that, everybody, that gives you a sense of what's coming up for this week. Um, Next week we'll start getting into more of the Europeans, of course, with Cortés and the arrival of the Spaniards. This idea of a Reconquista ethic that the Spaniards had, and then after that, we'll start talking more about what the English bring to the table, and of course the early foundations of the United States. Um, Now the readings coming up, not so much a little bit next week, but more so about the fourth week, are going to be more involved, more intense. There's going to be a lot more twists and turns, so to speak. So it's going to be really important that you not only review the overview essays carefully, but watch these videos. These videos will probably increase a little bit in terms of length in order for me to cover all of the twists and turns in the readings and how they're structured. So don't be surprised if some of the later videos with the modules come close to, say, maybe a 23, 25 minutes. But I want to make sure that you got a good sense in terms of uh, the best way to approach it. So I figured that by having both a overview essay in which you can read the information and these videos in which you can hear the information, by having this combination, I think that should help you get through these readings for these next for the remaining 6 weeks of the session. Okay, all right. So with that, everybody, that takes care of things from here at the French Valley World Headquarters. You guys have a great week. Try and stay cool, and I'll talk to you again next week as we start talking about Cortés and the Spaniards.